Well, first of all, thank you very much for staying this late. I know this is a pre-dinner show, so thank you for that. But first thing, I really want to express my gratitude and really impression on Strelka, which I think it's so fabulous. You know, I heard about it before. This is my first time. And the energy and the nimbleness of this place is inspirational. And I keep thinking about what other places around the world that I have seen that have this level of energy and savviness. And I think this is quite unique. So I'm very, very impressed and congratulate for such a wonderful summer also. So that's, get out of the way. Thank you. So today, I talk a little bit about our work at Y. I think we have a very small office. We have around 40, which make it even smaller because we have two locations. One, we start in LA, and then we open in New York around a few years after, so to function around that. We work a variety of things, mostly cultural and social projects. That's what we do. This is our office in LA, which is we stay in the same place when we started. And so that's where we are, and we have projects, you know, we actually have one project in Russia now, which is really nice. We have projects in Europe, Asia, a lot in Americas, and all of that. Well, before that, I want to start with giving you a little bit about who I am, you know, as that. So this is the map. So I was born and grew up in Thailand, which is the country in the middle, you know, over there. And then I also went to school and lived in Japan for about 15 years. I have a PhD in architecture, and then worked with my mentor, Tadao Ando, for 8 years. And so my life is really kind of in between these two places, which is kind of interesting. Because Thailand as a country, as a culture, is like a little guy in the middle of coach with two big giants on both sides. One is China and one is India. You know, it's called Indochine. And so when you're a small person between two big countries, you learn to behave. You learn to adjust between China and India. And Thai culture really reflected that, especially in the food. Japan is the opposite. Japan is, you know, somewhat small country at the very end of Asia as an island. Just like this guy, he's in the back row by himself. No one bother him. He's quite isolated. And Japanese culture, in a way, also reflect that in a sense that it's very refined, it's abstraction, and it's really taking a lot of influence also from China and India. But it has time and distance to really refine and absorb and make into its own. And how do we know that? We can see a lot from food, actually. You know, I'm just going to bore with that. Japanese food, you know, when you think about it, a lot of that actually comes from China and other places. But it's really about refinement. It's about abstraction, the order, the clarity of thought, the strength of unity. You know, in a way, that's what, you know, we all know as Japanese food. Thai food, the opposite, is all about mixing diverse, all kind of things together, many flavors at the same time, you know, salty, sweet, spicy. It's all about maximization of taste, whereas the Japanese is about the clarity of thought and ideas. And I think it's a very important to think because I think food is one aspect of culture which is really close to us. I think architecture at one point was close to people too. But I think we lost touch with it. Architecture has gone into its own little isolated think tank. And so I wish that we have good relationship with people as much as food. But what I'm thinking about here, and since because I live between Thailand and Japan, what I'm seeing is that I think culture in general is moving from Japanese sushi into pad thai. And what do I mean by that is that culture used to be very severe and strong. One singular person, one patron, one leader, pick one architect and say, hey, you design the whole city. No one else doesn't have to say anything. It's a very clear order of sense. But as we all know, the world now is becoming diverse and complex by its nature. And so we need not only just one ingredient like sushi that you only have a piece of fish, and the operation is how to cut it. But culture is now becoming mixed because there's no one culture, it's everything. Culture in the 21st century is all about mixing diversities and others, which we all know about that. I'm pretty sure it's the same in Russia as the rest of the world. I think the designers and the people who hold the key to how you can make unity out of diversity will win in the end. Because it's about getting every one of us to agree on one ingredient, on one dish. And how do we design? If design is like that, how can you be someone that allows everyone to be part of that? I think for that reason, I see that architecture is moving from something very abstract and minimal, which is like a Japanese sushi, into something very mixed and messy, and also very nifty, just like a Thai food. So that's kind of one thing that I want to talk about, how we move along. So with that notion, I started to, in a way, position my office in a way. We started in 2004, and one day I realized that when I was in the office, like everyone was trying to solve every problem with architecture, because that's what we have. Architecture is like this little hammer that we have, and everything looked like a nail to you. All my staff was trying to like architecturization, everything. And I feel like there's something wrong with that. How can we really be a full toolbox? So around 2009, I think, we diversified, around the time we opened the office in New York, we diversified from architecture. We have landscape, we have object design, we have art. And not only just the people we hire, we start to really engage people in general, curators, designers, artists, ecologists, anthropologists, to work with us on project. We invited them not only as advisor, but we also kind of invite them to design with us. And that process has been something that I'm very kind of proud of, because it really led up to something quite interesting. And for me, it felt that architects, instead of sitting there and designing a building per program, per brief, we should be engaged on a high level and really engage with vision and program, allow us to have more inputs into not just forms and spaces, but also visions and long-term social changes. So that's something that I'm very interested in. And now our office, both between New York and LA, we have 5 workshops. We have buildings, which is architecture, ground, which is landscape. We have objects, we make artwork, installation. We have ideas, which is kind of research and create outreach and things like that. And we just start our museums workshop just a month ago, because we have someone who I really respect, that I worked with before as a client. So we have formed this museums workshop to work with museums, not only just to design, but talk about operations and visions and other things. So this is kind of where we're coming from. So I'm all about seeing design as an ecology, as how everything connects to one another. I felt that the age of design in a vacuum is done. The damage is already done. So how do we get out from our ivory tower of profession and really collaborate and listen and do something that no one else has done before? I think that's the keyword to the future of the profession. And since there's a lot of young people today, I want you to think like that. I hope you can see the point that we can only be relevant if we really involve in a larger vision of the society. And I think that's what I hope to do. Anyway, so what I'm talking to today, I might show just a few projects. Our office is called Why, and I always think that architecture, actually great solutions, really exist between why and why not. We were told in school that why represent rationale, thinking, the reason something exists, why would you do this and that. So it in a way represents knowledge and all of the rational, thinkable process architecture is built. Why not, in a way, represent imagination, flimsy, crazy ideas and all of that. And I think, when you think about it, everything that you see in life, you base is on the rules of the game and the rationale why things exist. But if that's alone, it's not unique, and especially in this day and age, the computer can actually do it. So if you only think what is thinkable, everyone will think so, including the computer. In order to be unique, you need to have your own why not, which is the ingredients, the secret sauce, shall we say, that make your food different than other people. But at the same time, if you don't know how to cook, then the why not sauce will just not stick into anything. So the balance of the two, I think, is very important to think. And that's make each of us have our own solutions of what we want to cook and why it's unique from others. So that's kind of what I think. And maybe it started because, I spent a lot of time thinking about Thailand and Japan. Japan, of course, is about reasons and rationale. Thai is about, exuberance and, emotions and impressions. And because of that, to see all these differences allowed me to think, what's the right solution? I'm sure we all have similar contrasts or diverse things in life that we're trying to resource. And I think that's where unique things lie when you're trying to make contradictions come together in your own mind. Anyway, so I really kind of like and excited about this idea of having both, imagination and knowledge and how the two of them work together to make the work. So the first project, which talk a little about, so this is mushroom, if you don't know what it is, and this is sunflowers. So this is the beginning or how we think about this project. So we have a house that, in a way, have to be built on the ground, but cantilever out from the ground because it's on a cliff. So this cantilevering reminds me of this mushroom that stick on the trees, so sticking out. At the same time, the house is facing not the view, but the other neighbors. So the best way to do this is to really rotate the house towards the sun, like a sunflower. So this is what, let me see whether this is the house. So it sits, you can see that it's kind of almost like a cantilever from a cliff. At the same time, you see that the house rotates itself towards the view and the sun. So I felt that, in my process of designing, I was trying to see something that doesn't look too boxy and really create that. And I learned that from looking at, in this case, the code regulations as well as the need for view. It kind of create this kind of combination of that. So the house is now under construction after years of permit. The other, just kind of to give this idea, it's about a building and for Mont Blanc that we competed for, but we didn't win. It was for their museum, kind of a center. So the thought was that what's great about a pen? A pen is a pen is a pen, but what the pen could do. So I was thinking about the building as calligraphy, because calligraphy is the most wonderful dance of ink. And so how can we create the interior experience, move around the building as if you have this most beautiful calligraphy. And so when you're inside the building, you have this moving around from one to the other. You arrive on the outside, the garden, so the choreograph, the dance of experience go through is part of that. So that's kind of our concept. We did not win this competition. I think that an architect from Spain won that one. The other, now this time we actually win, good. This is a project in Scotland. It is a park. Let me show you what the project looked like. So this is, it's called the Ross Pavilion and the West Pinterest Street Gardens. It's right under the castle in Edinburgh. And so it was a big competition. We won this over a variety of very well-known architects. And to be honest, the reason why we won, in my opinion, is because we may be one of the few architects that actually use landscape as a concept. Everyone was trying to make a beautiful box as an object pavilion. Our solution was, we felt, and this goes back to the concept, is that in terms of the acupuncture architecture notion, how can we use a building not only to be a beautiful object, but how can it solve a problem? And the problem in this case is that Edinburgh is divided into old and new city. And because of that, there's a very chasm that's made by the train. So our project, in addition to being a pavilion, we try to connect the city back together. You can see from this diagram, which I'll not bore you about, but a variety of things. So we're using architectural ambition to solve an urban project by landscape design. So I felt that was important to think about because, I mean, not that they are not great architects, but because it was a blind competition. So at the last round, there were 7 architects, and we show up for the interview. And I was actually surprised that our project looked different because everyone was really making beautiful, beautiful pavilion. And ours is basically like a pavilion that's almost invisible, kind of interlaid into the landscape itself. Anyway, so it was a process also that not only that is landscape oriented, it also involved, even during the competition, that we engage the local citizens of Edinburgh. We set up workshops and we talk to them about what they want to do, what can this project help them, not only for music and performances, but urban renovations and others. So we actually got a lot of ideas and a lot of strategies by hearing and listening to people as we're doing the competition. So that's part of that. So this is now in design development, about to go into construction. This is a small house that we did in Venice, California, which is close to where I live, but it's not my house. But the idea is the client wants the biggest house, but also the biggest garden. And so, which is, kind of seemed to be a conflicting interest. But we felt like, well, and in Venice, houses are charming because there's like small traditional bungalows. So how can we do that? So we have the idea, why don't we just lift the house up and just let the garden go through, so therefore you can have the house and you can have the garden. So that's kind of what we were trying to do in this diagram that you see. So this is what the house looked like. So the house basically, the bedrooms and the rooms is lifting up from the ground, and the ground just becomes this glass box that you live in, living, kitchen, dining, connecting to the pool and the garden, and all the bedrooms and the living room, I mean the family rooms on the second floor, and each of the rooms of the bedrooms are designed like a little bungalow, so it has a scale that related to the bungalows of Venice, which is everyone was, just the interior of the house, which is have a lot of concrete and wood. This is again the look of it. Another project, which is our museum, we do quite a few museums. Right now we have maybe around 10 or 15 museums in the office. This is a renovation project, but I want to talk about, because it is a well-known museum. This is the Metropolitan Museum in New York. We're doing the big renovation of what is called the Rockefeller Wing, which is around 50,000 square feet. The part that's important to me, even though it's a renovation project, is that it is a renovation of Kevin Roche, who's an architect that I truly respect, who did a lot of expansion at the Met itself. And it's also important because for me, as someone who goes a lot to museums, I see museums as a building type that can solve world problems. Because museums, maybe restaurants also, is a place that allow people to like one another. I think you might not like the other person, but you eat his food or her, art and all of these. So culture has a way of creating empathy. And I think it's important in this time when people seem to see more difference and hate more than empathy and understanding. So I think museums is important in that sense that it is a site for creative encounters and empathy. And so all the museums we do, we try to make sure that when people see the art, they like the art and they also like one another. So that's kind of part of my matchmaker job as a designer. So in this case, we represent, in this particular wing, it represented art from America, Africa, and Oceania, which is 75% of the population of the world, and how these non-Western objects sit in a rather Western museum is important. How can we create a sense of equal and a sense of synergy between that? So that's what we did. So we reinstall every object, we renovate all of that, and create an uplifting and really kind of focusing on the objects and the masterpiece, and allow them to really relate to the Greek and Romans and modern and temperature and Western artwork around it. This is another project that it's a private museum that we're doing in the Philippines. It's a Coonshala, so it doesn't have a collection, just similar to the garage in that sense. This one sits right on the river in Manila, and it's around 80,000 square feet or 8,000 square meters. So the idea that how can you create something that's really tropical, but also function as an urban hub. So that's what we do. You can see the site. It sits on around 3 acres of land right on the river. So the idea was, to create this sense of arbor as if you're sitting under the palm tree. So this is what we designed. You can see that. I also like the building to be porous so that you can go through. It's kind of its own architectural promenade. So you can go into the galleries, you can go into others. Manila doesn't have too many contemporary art museums. So this one has to be not only for art, but design and fashion and cars and all those things. So it has to be rather flexible. And also there's a big component of nature. This is part of the design. This is the underside of, again, the whole metaphor was as if you walk into a palm trees and all of the design relate to that aspect of the project. This is another project in Chicago. This one has to do with history. So it started here. This is in 1896. I'm sorry, in this one it's 1893, which is the Chicago Exposition. It's one of the biggest expositions in America. This is when a lot of things happen. And it happened, and it was planned by Daniel Burnham, who's a master architect in Chicago, together with Olmsted, who's also another master landscape architect in America at that time. That was maybe the peak of the beginning of modern architecture in America. So what we did is after the expo, the park exists. And so we did the master plan for this park over here called Jackson Parks, which is an Olmsted design. Right now, we started this project before, but now the Obama President Library is moving over here. So now it's become a very heated location. It's right on the lake, but before that, no one was paying attention, but now everyone just wanted to do something. So that's part of that. So what we did is that we create a pavilion, if I can see, in the middle where it's a parking lot right now, and Olmsted designed a music court which never been used because it was too low. So we upgrade that and create a music court around it. The building looked like a bird because at that time, in the expo, Japan sent a pavilion to be built on the park, which is based after a Japanese traditional building based after a phoenix, because phoenix is believed to be the renewal, the energies, and all of that. And so that building, which was built in 1893, survived. It's the only building is allowed in the park on a wooded island, and also the only building that's left after the expo until it was burnt down in the Second World War when the Japanese and American relationship was not good. And so we built this as a second Phoenix Pavilion, but this time for culture and for local communities. It's places from like daycare, museums, and also it functioned as a stage for the music court. And this is a cafe looking at the lake and the museum itself. And part of the first phase of the project is we invited Yoko Ono, who's a Japanese-American artist, to work with us to create this sculpture over here called Sky Landing, because Yoko thinks that, and this is at exactly where the pavilion used to be, because of her being someone that lived between Japan and America, we felt that she can reflect on this aspect of relationship of cultures between America and Japan. And of course, she talked a lot about peace and how that evolves. So that's our first phase of the project. The second phase will be this pavilion that will hopefully be constructed soon. This is actually my own house, which I think you guys should come to visit, my new friends. First, another thing is I'm very glad that I made new friends at this symposium, so I'm glad that continue to do that. So I don't know why I'm showing this, but anyway, it's a happy house. I love living there. And nice, you can see the pool, you can see the house. It has a little bit of a Thai house quality to it. The last project is the project that we started, which finally just about to start construction, which is a bridge crossing a river. But what we did is that it started 2005, and when I went to see the site, I was very angry that because there's supposed to be a pedestrian bridge crossing the Ala River. It's only around 120 feet long, but the river was full of trash and dead animals and everything. So I felt very angry about that. So to the point I felt like I need to make the bridge out of the trash, so people understood how they treat the river. And so that's how I started, by using concrete as an aggregate and really incorporate the trash from the river onto the bridge and really started to think about. And as we think about that, we started to kind of roll this in a way that, for example, this wall is almost like a stratum into the earth. So when you dig it, you can see layers of trash, from your grandparents' age to your parents' generation to your generation. And so it's a kind of a moment that things that never go away. It's always with you, and you have to deal with that. And so when I did this, I didn't realize that it would be, kind of received well by the city, because they saw that as, because most of the bridge don't look like this, and they have concerns about safety because of the walls and things, but they love the idea that they can use the bridge to teach kids about trash and all of that. So this is the mock-up we did. Again, this is the conclusion slide. Thank you for staying. Again, I hope that there's one thing that you can leave with today, is that even though for a small office like ours, I felt that our contribution to the profession could be the viewpoint we take, learn from all cultures and be able to contribute some ideas towards something in the future. So thank you.
We have a Q&A session now. We're going to switch to it. Please raise your hand. We will bring you the mic. Okay, here is the first question. Hello, thank you very much for the talk. You have cool and really diverse projects. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the following. Do you have any principles or approaches to design, to planning, which you observe all the time, or is it different with every project? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I don't think I do, and to be honest, because I work with Taekwondo for 8 years, and when there's a very strong, recognizable language, and I felt, I went there and I contributed that language because I was very involved in the process. But after that, I felt, there must be something outside of this. So I want to kind of start with nothing. I felt that, if I have skills in terms of design and things, I would like to come to me. I'm not only using concrete or using geometry. I'm using nature, I'm using wood, I'm using steel, depending. But if there's any guiding philosophy or thinking, I think it might be the sense that I really like to create a place that people feel happy. I think somehow, it's a cliche to say, but I felt somehow we forgot that our work is a communication. We only produce objects. The other part from the object back to people's life is if the experience. And if the experience doesn't deliver, no matter how beautiful this object is, it doesn't do the job. So I felt that's the case. And I tend to, more and more, I tend to want the context of the site to lead me. And more as I get older, I think nature has always been something that I go to for inspirations, and I try to do more and more of that. Yeah.
We had another question here in the audience. Please raise your hand. Here it is. Hello. You have amazing projects, really. They have both a beautiful form and a function to them, and most importantly, they have a message, a meaning. I want to ask you, do you hire or maybe do you take interns, architects from other countries? Is it possible to take an internship with you or to work with you?
Yes. We actually, at this point, out of the 40 we sponsoring 15 green cards. It's ridiculous. And I didn't plan to do it that way, but when we interview people, I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about American designers, but the best people we found are normally foreigners. You know, and I think we work with many schools and cities. We have a few Latvians because we have a relationship with the organization there, and so every year there's an intern from Latvia, and they're really good. We work with Spain. We work, you know, also American, too, from the schools there, and me and other people teach at universities, so we sometimes also recruit students. So I think interns are the best thing in things. And for me, even though I have a PhD in architecture, I felt like I learned everything through my mentor. So I believe not in learning things in school, even though I spent a lot of time in school, but really watching and observing someone you respect and learn from that person. Just like, you know, if you want to learn to cook, you cannot learn it in a cooking school. You have to go to a restaurant. You know, I think the same thing that in architecture, yes, you need to study in school for a little bit, but the best thing is you learn from your job. So I do believe in internship and really bring people in. And yesterday, you know, Winnie Mas talked about how he worked with young people and things like that. I think that's a brave thing to do, and I think that's definitely the future, yeah.
Thank you very much for the answer. I also have a question. Your projects cost a lot of money. It's insanely expensive. And here in Russia, we still have the problem of trying to sell our projects. So we always have to explain why it costs so much. And we have to fight for every penny, really. Because the commissioners, they just don't want to pay for the concepts that we suggest. Could you please explain to us why architectural concepts should cost a lot, and how can we convince our commissioners to pay?
I think that's a very good question. And I can tell you honestly that it's not a Russian unique problem. The world has that problem. Yeah. And again, it is a symptom to say that people don't see importance in architecture. You know, I think, so we need to look at it that way, you know, because if you compare to food, again, I'm sorry to go back to food again, people would not put bad ingredients in their body, right? I mean, way back when people would eat anything, but now when you think about in the last 20 years, you have organic, you have, you know, everything's around it. People very care about well-being and health and happiness. I think we need to take that into consideration. And for me, my way of convincing clients to spend money is always to allow them to take a longer look. Because most of the time, people have money. They just don't want to spend because they feel like, well, if I can get the building for half the price, why not? It looked the same. It doesn't fall apart. So, which is understandable because they didn't go to school in architecture. They couldn't discern, you know, A architecture from C architecture. So you need to, in a way, engage and educate them. So, but I also I always tell my client that when you design a museum, it's not a building, it's a cultural investment, right? When you design a school, it's not a building, it's an educational investment. So you need to be able to tell them how the building can give them the profit, the return. So we have to talk in that social response issue, you know, and I think, to be honest, I felt architects in general are not very good at that because they tend to kind of position themselves as an artist. So therefore, the work should speak for itself. You know, artists should not be talking about why their work have values or have return to people. I think we need to reposition that and talk about why certain things, because it happened in my job every day as well, that I have to defend details, I have to defend materials, I have to defend all of these things. I think, again, education, trust, and investment.
Отличный рецепт, спасибо. У нас есть еще время на пару вопросов.
A great recipe, thank you very much. We have time for 2 more questions. Please raise your hand, we will bring you the mic.
На человека, который, видимо, стесняется поднять руку, я не понимаю, что это за жесты. Вы могли, пожалуйста, встать? Пожалуйста, вас...
Please stand up, because we can't see it.
Sorry.
We can't see you.
What is the one most important thing you learned from your work with Tadao Ando?
Well, I think I learned mostly about how work and life can be the same thing. You know, I think because I work and, you know, live with him very closely, so I see the man and the architect who's different. I see what he talked about and what he did. And I think that was a fundamental lesson for me that, you know, philosophy, you know, it's in America we say walk the walk, right? Walk the talk. And I think he showed that it's doable. Because when you stay, in my case also in universities, the intellectualization of architecture sometimes doesn't help anyone. You know, it's a mind game. And I think he allowed me to think that if you have a philosophy and if you're a good designer, your work need to carry the philosophy, not your mouth. I think once that happened, you know, I stopped really talking, you know, the work, but I think it's all about that. And I think that was a fundamental awakening for me, because even though I like his work from before, you know, I think when I was going to school in Japan, you know, he still was seen as someone who doesn't have a theory. He's like a builder. You know, even though he built beautiful objects, there's no theory. The work is not very easy to analyze. You cannot do a thesis on it because there's no real intellectual kind of parameter that you can use it to judge the work. But when I work with him, when I understand how he worked, when I, you know, try to put myself into that legacy, that language, I realize that it's just, again, like food. You know, if you have the philosophy, if you have a vision, people should be able to taste it in your food. And if people cannot taste that in your food, it doesn't mean you're not a good cook. You might be a good thinker. And I think that carry with me, that's become something that I measure architecture with also. That everything that you do have to be contained within the work that you produce. So therefore, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Есть еще вопрос? Да,
One more
пожалуйста.
question, please.
Good evening.
Можно говорить по-русски, вам переведут.
По-русски хорошо. Мы уже говорили про Tadao Ando.
Sorry, you can
We have-
switch to the English. I didn't understand that you speak
All
English.
right.
Sorry.
Можно на любом языке. Да.
So I can ask a question in any language,
We
really.
mentioned Tadao Ando and the fact that you work together. In his works, he makes brilliant textures, brilliant concrete surfaces. I work at the building just beside. It's a gas tube museum designed by Renzo Piano. And I work as engineer there. We have architectural concretes. Where is the role of the craftsmanship in contemporary architecture? We need to have brilliant masters, people who know how to make these formworks, this brilliant concrete. So there are 2 questions. What is the role of the craftsmanship today in the contemporary architecture? And the second question, what about secrets in the concrete? Mixtures, how to pour concrete, techniques, and so on? Thank you.
Well, I think you answered your own question. I think craftsmanship is alive, and it's even more needed than before because it's, one of the few human touch left in architecture. I think people are really striving for human quality, right? Because again, I mean, we might not see it, but I feel like, in the next 10 years, a lot of jobs, a lot of life will be replaced by AI, as we all know that. And so the only thing we can do that AI cannot do is, the why not, right? So the craftsmanship is definitely crucial. And go back to the questions, like we need to be able to convince and educate the clients to pay for the craftsmanship. They need to see that. And the craftsmanship is not only in materials, it's in detailing, it's in all kind of things, in space making and all of that. And I obviously learned a lot about concrete from Ando, and in a way I try not to just do that because I can do that quite well. So leading back to your second question, I think when you look at concrete, in a very philosophical, special sense, concrete has been since Roman time, right? I think every architect has used it even before modern. And Ando, in a way, because he's so decisive that he doesn't use anything else, so it makes it very clear. His concrete is beautiful because he pays attention to the workers. And for me, there's a few things that are interesting about that. Number one is that when you look at concrete, for example, you look at Le Corbusier, you look at Louis Kahn, you're looking at Ando, the concrete are very different. It talks about different spirit. Corbusier doesn't really care about what concrete looks like because his vision is universal. He wants to design a building that can be built anywhere. He doesn't rely on craftsmanship. He just wants the ambition to be global. Kahn, in another way, is really related in a classical sense. Ando's concrete is very Japanese, even though he built outside of Japan now, because I don't want to bore you, but the modules of the formwork and the mix is very different. Construction in Japan is very human. There's no cranes, everything is carried by human. So the plywood size that used for the concrete in Japan is 90 centimeters by 180, which is the size of the tatami mat, which is the module construction in Japan. Whereas in America, it's 1.2 by 2.4, right? So it becomes 90 cents and 180 is thin enough for one person to carry. But because of that, it's very thin. So when you pour the concrete, it has the texture. And this is not intentional. It's just because of construction technique, because one person needs to be able to carry that. So the plywood is quite thin and smaller. And so it meets with the Japanese scale. But the same thing, if you look at concrete in America, whether it's Louis Kahn or Ando or even on my own work, the module is 1.2 by 2.4, and the plywood is very thick. So it cannot be carried by humans. It has to be craned into one another, just like what you see over there. So it has a very smooth, precise way comparing to Japanese concrete. I don't think one is better than the other, even though there are clients that I know who would say, oh, we would like our concrete to have this pillow kind of thing like you have in Japan. I felt like it's an alien concept because if you cook something, it should reflect the place that you're cooking it at. So if you make concrete in America, it should be American. It should have the spirit of the place. And I know that very well because I work on many projects for Ando and for myself in any place from Japan, America, France, Italy, Germany, and Asia and others. And every time I have to go around and work with the workers to build it up. But the goal is not trying to meet an ideal in Japan. The goal is trying to work with the local workers to develop the best thing we can do together at a particular site. So that's kind of the cooking concept, because you have to start from the shelf and the ingredients you have in each particular location and bring it up to the highest level.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Я позволю себе задать последний, the last question from
Okay.
me. Последний вопрос этой
The
конференции будет
last
очень
question of the
банальным,
conference will be
но
quite
поскольку закрываете эту
cliche, maybe, but
конференцию,
since you
ответьте
are
на
the
вопрос,
closing
кто он,
performer,
архитектор
please
будущего?
answer the question. Who is the future architect? Who is the architect of the
Как его
future?
описать?
Describe him or her.
I think the future of the profession, I see architect as not a politician, but someone who is able to engage with people at large, like a ringleader, or someone that can really use their skills in planning and designing, but not to do your own little vision, but using that to show everyone what could be done together and create a consensus, create an agreement out of it. And I felt that that is the future of architecture, because architecture is not a personal matter. It is a public matter. And unless you have a public mind and willing to engage with public discourses, it will be a very obsolete position. And I want it to be not that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Эти аплодисменты